Hey there everybody, welcome back to my channel. It's that time again. Time for me to tell you all about the books I have been reading. Now luckily, unlike last time, I do not have 14 books to review. Instead, I only have 6. So this video should A, go much faster, and B, be much easier to make. So with that said, I have read a lot of really good books recently and a few not so good books, and I'm excited to talk about all of them with you, so let's jump right into it. And also, as always, these videos are spoiler free, so if you've not read any or all of these books, you are safe to watch. I'm not going to be spoiling anything. So the first book that I have read since last we spoke was Of Fire and Stars by Audrey Coulthurst. And in this novel, a princess with an affinity for fire magic is betrothed to a prince from a kingdom where magic is outlawed, and as she attempts to hide her powers, she finds herself falling not for her betrothed, but for his sister. This book was a young adult fantasy novel, and unfortunately, it is a book that I DNF'd. Now, I think there are a couple of reasons why I DNF'd this book. The first being that it was a political fantasy novel, meaning that the main plot had a lot to do with politics because, like I just said, the main character has magical powers, but the kingdom that she's marrying into has outlawed magic, and so that has created a lot of tension between those with magic and those without, and so there's kind of like a war brewing, and there is an assassination that kind of kicks off the entire plot, and so it's a lot of politics, a lot of different things that just I'm not a fan of, unfortunately. I'm one of those people who loves contemporary political novels such as The Hate U Give, you know, that talks about modern politics and issues that are relevant today. But what I don't like is for my fantasy worlds to be politics heavy because, like, I get enough of that in real life. I don't need it in my fantasy worlds. I mean, obviously some politics in a fantasy world is fine. Every world's going to have a political system, or usually they will. So, like, it doesn't bother me if it exists, but I don't want it to be the focus of the plot, if you get what I mean. And I had a similar problem with The Cruel Prince, with that being a political fantasy novel as well, but there were enough redeeming qualities about the book for me to push through that one, but for this one it just was too much and I just wasn't enjoying myself. And the second reason I had trouble enjoying it and ended up putting it down was because I was listening to it on Audible, and with there being so much politics and world building and everything, it was just too much for me to be able to grasp while listening to the book. Like, they were explaining all of this political stuff, like who these different players were in the political world, and like how the different politics worked and how the different magic systems worked and everything, and it was just going right over my head. Retention of information was not happening in my brain. So it's really hard to get invested in a book and to enjoy it if you're not remembering anything, if you're getting confused, if every 5 seconds you're like, who is this character? Who are they talking about? How does this work? What's happening? Like, it's just impossible to enjoy a book when you're feeling that way. So that's something I learned about myself. It's that I really can't listen to audiobooks if the book is like a high fantasy or anything with like intense world building. I'm not going to be able to follow that. However, because I enjoyed The Cruel Prince even with the political elements, I feel like I might someday come back to this novel in physical form and try reading it, because maybe if I'm able to like read stuff, I'll retain it better, and if I have the ability to flip back and check things, I might be able to enjoy it more, and then maybe I can get past the political stuff and enjoy the rest of the story. I don't know, so I'm willing to maybe come back to the story someday, but as of right now, I had to DNF the audiobook because it was too much. And other than that, I can't really speak to the rest of the book because I was so confused that I didn't know who half the characters were, so I can't tell you if they were well written. I was so focused on trying to retain the information about the world building that the writing itself, I wasn't able to really enjoy the written word or, you know, how the audiobook narrators were speaking the words and how they sounded, so I can't tell you anything about the writing either. I really can't tell you much about this book, which is unfortunate. And it's extra unfortunate because this is a novel with a female-female romance, and I haven't really read very many of those, so I wanted to love this book so bad, and it's a shame that I couldn't, but what you gonna do? So after that novel, I moved on to The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid, in which a young reporter is hired by a famous actress, one who is well known for having had 7 husbands throughout her life, to pen her autobiography, with the stipulation that the reporter can only publish the book once the actress has died. This was an adult contemporary / historical fiction novel, and I rated it 5 out of 5 stars. Seriously, this book was amazing, which is no surprise because if you remember in the last recent reads video, I talked about another book by the same author, which was Daisy Jones and the Six, and I loved that, and this book was so similar to that, and I loved it maybe even more. Like, if I could rate it like 12 out of 5 stars, I would, but Goodreads doesn't let me do that, so. But seriously guys, I can't say enough good things about this book. It was written in a similar fashion to how Daisy Jones and the Six was written, in that it was in interview format, but it was also different because in Daisy Jones and the Six there were multiple people being interviewed and it was all kind of like in dialogue, you know, like it was the characters speaking and whatever, but the way it read in Evelyn Hugo was there was only Evelyn was getting interviewed, so her interview portions read more like just a first-person narrative, like a first-person novel, and then it would switch back and forth between following the reporter and her like work struggles, relationship struggles, self-image struggles, and then into Evelyn Hugo's life following her story and journey. And I really liked both parts of the story. Like, when it jumped out of Evelyn's story, it wasn't like I was bored with the reporter's life. I was invested in what was happening with her, though, you know, most of the story did follow Evelyn. You know, that was the main focus of the story, but you know, both parts were really intriguing. The writing, as usual, gorgeous, beautiful, loved it. All of the characters, like every single character in this book, were so fleshed out, and I cared so deeply about all of them, and it was amazing. It was great. And this is not a spoiler because it is mentioned within the first couple of chapters of the book, but there is a female-female romance in this book, so I got my female-female romance book, and it was a 5-star read, so at least that worked out for me. Seriously, if you haven't read this book, I highly recommend it, and if Daisy Jones and the Six didn't appeal to you because of the format, just know that this book, while similar in format, is not the same, so you will probably enjoy this one for sure. Then the next book I read was Tiffany Sly Lives Here Now by Dana L. Davis. In this book, a teen girl moves to California to live with the father she's never met and his family, and has to deal with strict household rules, racism, and familial tensions. And this was a young adult contemporary novel that I rated 2.5 out of 5 stars. Now, it's kind of weird because for most of the book, I really thought I loved it. Like, I flew through this book, finished it in a day, but in the end, I guess there wasn't the payoff that I was hoping for. The ending was just what really threw me, and I can't say more than that because obviously I don't want to spoil anything. But what I can say is that just this book really stressed me out, which I was fine with until there wasn't payoff, or until the ending just kind of messed it all up for me, you know? Like, I was fine with being stressed out by the different problems that Tiffany, the main character, was struggling with until the end, and then I was like, oh. But I mean, there wasn't technically anything wrong with the book. Like, the writing was fine, the plot, tension, arcs were fine. I just personally had issue with the story as a whole, and so to me personally, it was only worth 2.5 stars. Then after that, I moved on to a much better book, which was Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. In this book, the first son of the United States and a prince of England quickly turn from enemies to lovers after a mishap involving a wedding cake, but have to keep their relationship a secret from the tabloids for the sake of their families and reputations. This was a new adult contemporary romance that I rated 5 out of 5 stars. It was so good. The romance was sexy and swoon-worthy. The writing was so great. Casey really has a way with words. Like, there were so many just beautiful, interesting lines in this book, and based on what she's been sharing on Twitter, her next book has even more of them, and I'm very sincerely looking forward to that. All of the characters were fun to read about. I will say I was mainly invested in the 2 main characters, less so in the side characters, but like sincerely, like the main character, Alex, and the romantic interest whose name is slipping my mind right now, but they were so cute, so fun to read about. I loved every second of this book. If I were to nitpick and find just like one thing that I didn't really love about this book, it's that I personally tend to enjoy it more when books wrap up their main plot line last. You know, like they wrap up all the subplots and then the main plot is like the final thing that's wrapped up. I prefer that. And this book did not do that, which kind of made it feel like the book went on for a hair too long. But, like, that's nitpicking. Like, that's not something that I would deduct points from this book for. After that, I read, and you're gonna laugh at this title, but I read Big Fat Paycheck by Colton Lawrence. And this was a fun, kid-friendly book all about writing your first screenplay and becoming a rich and famous screenwriter. It was a nonfiction book that I, surprisingly, actually rated 4 out of 5 stars. Go figure. And the reason I rated it 4 out of 5 stars, even though the title was ridiculous and it was so gimmicky. Like, the whole time the author was like, this is how you're going to become a rich and famous screenwriter. This is how you're going to become a millionaire. This is how you're going to become, like, world famous. Like, it was so gimmicky, but, like, it was a book for kids. So if you're going to try to engage children and get them interested in screenwriting, like, children are going to be enticed by the idea of being millionaires. Like, so the author knew what he was doing for his target audience, so I can't really begrudge him for that. And other than that, the book did what I needed it to do, which was give me the bare essentials for how to write a screenplay. Like, I needed the basics. I needed to know what every single element of a screenplay was and how to properly format a screenplay, what to do with the different elements, how to plot out a screenplay, because that's something that I'm interested in eventually tackling, is writing a screenplay. So it did what I needed it to do, so I really appreciated it. Plus, even though it was gimmicky, there was a very distinct, fun voice to this book, so it kept it from feeling like a textbook, you know, it kept it from feeling dry or pretentious. So yeah, overall, did what I needed to do, had fun reading it. It was a little gimmicky, but, you know, it did what I needed to do. And then finally, the most recent book that I have read is You'd Be Mine by Erin Hahn. And in this book, 2 country singers, one a deeply troubled heartbreaker with a drinking problem, and the other an up-and-coming star with a tragic past, go on a summer tour together and deal with the ups and downs of a romance that might very well be doomed to fail. And this was a young adult contemporary romance that I rated 3 out of 5 stars. And this book honestly was just very middle of the road for me. Like, I didn't love it and I didn't hate it. It just existed. Like, the writing was fine, the characters were fine. I will say I was more invested in the 2 main characters and couldn't give a crap about the side characters. Like, they could have just not existed for all I cared. There was nothing special about those side characters. The plot was fine. You know, it was just all fine. The only thing I really had a strong opinion about, and when I say strong, I mean a strong opinion about, was that I didn't like the romance. Which sucks because this was a romance novel. This was a young adult contemporary romance novel, and I didn't like the romance. I didn't like that it existed because these 2 characters had so much trauma They both had such tragic pasts that I would have rather just watched them for the whole book unpack their trauma and work through their tragic past, as opposed to trying to make a relationship between the two of them work. Like, it was stressing me out. Because here's the thing, to me, personally, I don't think two people who are actively dealing with trauma and trying to work through really tragic things that have happened to them, like they're actively trying to work through it, I don't think those two people should be getting together, because that causes more harm than good. If one of them had been through this trauma and already actively worked through it and gotten past it and was helping the other person, that would have been one thing. You know, I think that's really great. You know, they can empathize with them. They know what that person's going through, but they have already worked past it, and now they're able to lift the other person up, help them through the trauma. Like, that's great. I love that. But when both people are actively going through it at the same time and they're both in that really dark place, a lot of the time that means they're going to be dragging each other down, not lifting each other up. Even if they might try to help each other and lift each other up, really they just keep dragging each other down, because negativity breeds negativity. And I've seen this in real life too. I had a friend who was dating this guy, and both of them were struggling with anxiety and depression and all that other fun stuff, you know. And both of them really wanted to help the other. Both of them really wanted to fix the other. But at the end of the day, they were both dragging each other down and making the situation worse for each other. And that's what I felt was happening in this book, and it was stressing me out, and I really didn't like it. Like I said, I would have rather read a book where these two characters just individually unpacked and dealt with their trauma and then got together, rather than this on again, off again thing that they had going on, as both of them tried to make something work, but then, you know, they were dealing with their shit and everything blew up over and over and over again, you know? So that's just my personal opinion, my personal take on it. But you may enjoy that kind of book. I'm not saying it was a bad book. Just for me personally, it struck me the wrong way. But yeah, other than that, you know, just very middle of the road, a decent debut novel for this author. And those are all the books I read recently, so hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, you know what to do. Like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. And I hope you have a beautiful day, and I'll see you next time. Bye!